I want to take this opportunity to thank very much the Attorney General for coming back to the Bar Association. We very much appreciate your membership, your involvement, and your actions on behalf of lawyers in the state. Many of you know that the Attorney General is an attorney, an active attorney, which is really important. He was previously a congressional staffer. He was in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in 2004. He was a Montgomery County commissioner. He presented the Pope with the framed scroll. I thought that was pretty neat, at St. Charles Borromeo Seminary. I want to hear about that a little bit. And he has 4 kids, which to me, I don't know how you do it, because I have 3, and that's a juggle. So I want to thank you. We're going to have an opportunity for question and answers. We will have a roving microphone. So please, feel free to think about your questions now while the Attorney General is speaking. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Deb. It's good to be back. I will say it is really nice to be back and not sitting up here with a whole bunch of candidates that are trying to beat your brains in. So it is nice to have come out on the other side of this and to have the chance to visit with all of you. Deb, thank you very much for the kind introduction and pointing out I think there's 2 most important things you need to know about me. One is that I have 4 kids, and the other is I married my high school sweetheart, and she's put up with me since the 9th grade, and we're really blessed. I'm blessed to be able to live my dream of public service. I'm also blessed to have an incredible family. So, Deb, thank you for the introduction, and really, I also want to say thank you for your leadership. I have noticed, particularly in these interesting times, the way the Bar Association has really stepped up its role civically, and I assume that is not by accident, and so I appreciate your voice being part of the important discussions of the day. I want to introduce to you Jonathan Goldman, who is my Executive Deputy Attorney General in charge of all civil matters for the AG's office. Jonathan is kind of midway back there, a former partner at Blank Rome here in the city of Philadelphia, an exceptional lawyer, and he actually tried to have a career in politics. He ran successfully, I would point out, for the Young Lawyers Division of the Bar Association. He won, but it was such a negative campaign, he could never go back and run again. I'm just kidding about the negative part, but he's someone who is not only from this community and not only someone who cares deeply about the work of the Bar Association, but is really my right hand and does an exceptional job for us in the AG's office. So wanted you to have the chance to meet him, and he'll be here afterwards to share some thoughts with you as well. He's really the guy you want to get to know, much more so than me. When we last met and had an opportunity to talk about this office, I really focused on 3 things. Number 1, making the office work again. Number 2, dealing with really the top public safety and public health threat in Pennsylvania, which is the heroin and opioid epidemic. And number 3, being the one person every Pennsylvanian could rely on to protect their interests and their rights. I made a commitment to the people of Pennsylvania that those would be the things I worked on, and that's exactly what we've done. I wanted to walk you through a little bit of our progress in that area. First and foremost, obviously, we inherited some challenges in the Attorney General's office. And I have to say that, notwithstanding the fact that we've brought in a nearly entirely new senior leadership team, the strongest, most diverse, most ethical team that's ever been assembled, I believe, in the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. We were met there by some really committed and dedicated public servants who have become an equally important part of this team. And we've put together in an office that's about 900 people strong, a really, really terrific team of lawyers, agents, and staff, Jonathan being chief among them as one of the leaders. And I hope you've noticed that we've instilled a level of professionalism in the work that we do, that the people we have on the other end of the phone or the other end of the table are professional and serious. And each and every day we go out and we do our work, it's to do the right thing for the right reasons each and every time. And I've been involved in public life long enough to know that you can't please all the people all the time. And in this job, that's not my desire. My desire is not to please people. My desire is to dispense justice. And at the end of the day, if people feel like they got a fair shot in the Attorney General's office, if they feel like our team that they're interacting with each day are giving them a fair shot or acting ethically or acting in an upstanding way, then ultimately we've improved our justice system here. So that was really job number one, and I'm pleased to be able to report to you that we've certainly checked that box. We're going to continue to make improvements as the years go on, but we feel really good about where we are in that process. Second thing is dealing with, really, as I said before, the top public safety and public health threat in Pennsylvania, the heroin and opioid epidemic. And it seemed crazy for a guy running to be the chief law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to say up front when we were laying out our plans that you simply can't arrest your way out of this crisis. I fundamentally believe that. Now, to make clear, we have arrested more drug dealers in my first 8 months in office, particularly heroin dealers, than we've arrested before in the same time period. We arrest 4 drug dealers a day every single day I've been in office. We're charging more drug dealers today with drug delivery resulting in death. That is, the poison they sell in our community resulting in the death of an individual. We're not just charging them with drug dealing offenses, but we're charging them with drug delivery resulting in death. So instead of a 2 or 5 year term, they're getting they can get potentially between 20 and 40 years. We're being very tough on these dealers. But we have to recognize that in order to deal with this epidemic, you got to deal with it in a multidisciplinary way. So what does that mean? We got to look at the entire supply chain. We got to look at the role doctors are playing in this. And we've doubled the number of diversion arrests. That's where a doctor, nurse, someone else actually takes the prescription drug, a legal prescription drug, and diverts it for illegal or criminal purposes. We've doubled the number of arrests in the first quarter of 17 versus the first quarter of 2016. But let's examine that supply chain further. 80% of heroin addicts start with a legal prescription drug, and 70% of them get that legal prescription drug from a friend, a relative, or what's laying around in the medicine cabinet. So if you're going to really examine the supply chain, you got to look at the pharmaceutical companies. And that's why I announced a few months ago, and then just about 3 hours ago announced an expansion of it, that Pennsylvania is one of the 5 lead states in a multi-state investigation in the opioid manufacturing industry, which today stands at over 40 attorneys general. We are crossing party lines and state lines in order to get at one of the root causes of this crisis and this epidemic, and that is the manner in which these opioid manufacturing companies are conducting themselves. Just a few hours ago in Upper Dublin Township in Montgomery County, standing with a group of moms and dads and others who have dealt with the pain of someone who succumbed to addiction, we announced the targets of our investigation, and we announced the process that we're going forth to be able to get to the bottom of this. Make no mistake, we will hold the pharmaceutical industry accountable and responsible for their role in this crisis. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that someone who is dealing with addiction is suffering from a disease, not necessarily committing a crime. And when you look at it that way, you recognize you've got to create greater access to treatment. So I stood in the boardroom of Independence Blue Cross and have made similar statements at Highmark and UPMC and other places around Pennsylvania, and challenged insurance companies to do more to create access to treatment. Challenged insurance companies to do more to try and help us deal with this crisis. Why is it so easy for a doctor to prescribe a 60-day supply of Percocet, but they got to jump through hoops for days and days and days just to get someone into a couple weeks worth of treatment? It's not okay, and we have got to change the dynamic when it comes to dealing with access to treatment. I'm pleased that IBC has stepped up and begun to make some reforms and make it easier to get access to treatment. I'm pleased that on a bipartisan basis, attorneys general and leaders in Congress have come together to recognize that we've got to work together to create greater access to treatment. That's why I'm working with Ohio's Attorney General, Mike DeWine, a Republican, I would point out, and Brian Fitzpatrick, a congressman from Bucks County, also a Republican, as well as Democrats in Congress and Democratic attorneys general, Republican attorneys general, to change a federal law that's been on the books for 6 decades that says Medicaid can't reimburse for drug and alcohol treatment in facilities that have more than 16 beds. It's an insane law, and it's got to be changed. And these members of Congress have come together to work on changing it. Attorneys general have come to work together on changing it. We actually passed NAG policy in order to do this, National Association of Attorneys General policy, to do this. And I've challenged President Trump through his statement that he will make a national declaration of emergency as it relates to the heroin and opioid epidemic, then when he actually signs it through the stroke of a pen, he can do away with that limitation on treatment by the stroke of a pen. And I've challenged the president to come forth and do this. This is bipartisan, this is common sense, and this would go a long way toward helping us get into treatment. The final piece of this is getting the public engaged in helping us. As I said before, 80% of heroin addicts start with a legal prescription drug. 70% of them get it from a friend or relative or what's laying around in a medicine cabinet. That's why we're working so hard across Pennsylvania to dispose of unused prescription drugs laying around in people's medicine cabinets. We have destroyed through these drug drop boxes, which is a combination program with the DA's, obviously the AG's office and the DEA and the National Guard. We've disposed of 29 tons so far this year of prescription drugs that have been laying around in people's medicine cabinets. That's even more than we did in all 12 months last year. This is a key way the community can help us stop someone from becoming an addict. And in rural Pennsylvania, where we have a particularly pronounced issue of high amount of these opioid painkillers laying around, we've distributed 300,000 drug deactivation pouches that are now available at your local pharmacies so that the public can help engage in this battle. So this is a big public safety threat, a big public health threat, and we're working in a multidisciplinary way to deal with it. That's an example of the kind of approach I bring to the AG's office, my team brings to the AG's office, not just doing it the way it's always been done, but looking at a problem, understanding the core challenges and the root causes of it, and then dealing with it in a multidisciplinary way. We've also been willing to get out there and take on the big fights, particularly on the consumer side and the protection of individual civil rights and civil liberties. On the consumer side, we have really beefed up our efforts to deal with financial crimes and financial scams, especially against our seniors. Probably the one most notable in the news today is the Equifax data breach. And I'm pleased to tell you that Pennsylvania is the lead state in this national investigation into Equifax. We have about 33 states right now involved in our investigation. It's something I'm proud that my Bureau of Consumer Protection is leading, and we're working with a bipartisan group of attorneys general to get to the bottom of it. Make no mistake, we will get to the bottom of the data breach. We will recover for our respective states and commonwealths. But what we really want to do here is change corporate behavior and make sure that your data is protected, whether it's at Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, any other agency. And this is really different than the Target data breach that we were heavily involved in. At Target, you go there to buy goods, right? You go there to buy your groceries, you go there to buy a t-shirt, whatever it is that you go to buy there. And at the same time, they had lax controls over your data. When it comes to Equifax, their entire business is to protect your data. That is what they sell, that's what they do. And unfortunately, we are forced to use them. We didn't have a choice, we didn't sign up with them, we were forced to use them and forced to give them over our personal information. And a lot of people including me, feel very violated by this. And so we're going to work very hard to get to the bottom of it and protect consumers. We've also been willing to step up our game and take on big fights when it comes to other areas where we've seen the federal government begin to maybe take a step back. Environmental protection is a key one, where we have jurisdiction, but historically we worked really closely with the EPA. Well, this EPA is a little bit different than the EPAs in the past, and so we've really beefed up our efforts and created a new unit focused specifically on environmental protection and hired a Chief Deputy Attorney General for environmental protection. We're seeing similar need in the area of labor and employment. I hired the first ever Chief Deputy Attorney General for fair labor, and she's doing a fantastic job for us in protecting the interests of workers all across Pennsylvania. Two examples where, as the federal government begins to maybe take a step back, we're willing to take a step up to protect the people of Pennsylvania. I said when I was sworn in, whether it's a dealer on the street corner, some multinational corporation, or even the President of the United States, if you try and undermine the rights and interests of the people of Pennsylvania, you're going to have to go through me. And I take that responsibility very seriously. It should come as no surprise to anybody in this room that I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I didn't support Donald Trump. But I hope you also recognize, as I certainly do and as my team does, that this isn't about politics and this isn't about policy preference. It is about protecting the rule of law. And so when the Trump administration has gone forward and violated the rule of law, we have been willing to step up in a leadership way across this country and say, no, you can't do that to the people of Pennsylvania. You're harming the interests of our Commonwealth. The first example of that was a week or so into my term when the president put forth the initial travel ban, which we believe to not only be unlawful and unconstitutional, but completely un-American. We helped organize a coalition of attorneys general. We pushed back, and ultimately the Trump administration themselves had to pull back on that initial travel ban. We had a situation just a couple months ago in the environmental realm where the EPA administrator was going to not put into effect rules that protect communities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh from serious smog and pollution, part of the Clean Air Act implementation. And they just said they weren't going to do it. So we helped organize a coalition of state attorneys general and said to the Trump administration, we're going to sue you. Incredibly, 24 hours later, they withdrew their essentially rejection of that rule and instead put the rules into effect to protect our environment. So I think you're seeing, in a really interesting way, issues of federalism, checks and balances on display day in and day out. And I want to make it very, very clear. I will affix the good name of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania time and time and time again in a lawsuit against this administration or anyone else that seeks to undermine the rule of law and the interests and rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And it will simply be based on the rule of law. At the end of the day, we can have policy differences and political differences, and it's good to try and hash them out during election season. That's not my concern, and that's not my job. My job is to protect the interests of Pennsylvania and protect the rule of law, and that's what we're trying to do. You're seeing us be very active, as I said, in the environmental realm, protecting a woman's right to choose, protecting our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, protecting students on campus from sexual assault, protecting those who have student loans from the for-profit college industry. In each and every one of these instances, the federal government has made it harder for the people of Pennsylvania and easier for industry, easier for those who maybe have different interests than ours here in the Commonwealth. And we haven't been afraid to step up. So whether it's dealing with the public safety threat of heroin, whether it's dealing with community issues like gun violence, whether it's dealing with protecting seniors from scams, whether it's dealing with protecting the rights and interests of the people of Pennsylvania, I hope you know that the Attorney General's Office in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is again functioning at a high level, and we're here to work with you and protect your interests and the people of Pennsylvania's interests every step of the way. With that, I'd love to take your questions. I'd love to hear what's on your mind. Obviously, there are a lot of topics I didn't discuss in my remarks, but I'm happy to do my best to address them in your questions. And with that, Deb, I'll turn it back to you.
So I'm going to take the Chancellor's prerogative.
Oh, boy.
And ask the first question and then turn it over. So I'm going to bring it back to Harrisburg.
Okay.
And Harrisburg's having a little problem with balancing a budget.
Right.
Are they taking any of your money? And what are they doing with the money that you recover? How's it being used?
They're not taking our money.
That's not what I heard from my legislative liaison.
Yeah. Well, what are you hearing?
I heard that they're going to come. They're going to try to tap into some of the funds that you've recovered.
Well, okay. When we recover funds, so for example, we recovered recently $35 million worth of funds from Volkswagen as part of our suit against Volkswagen. And that money, as a condition of the settlement, is to be set aside for environmental protection. We don't control that money. Once we win that case or settle or whatever, that money goes to the Treasury. In theory, if the legislature and the governor wanted to pass a law that says it should be spent differently, I suppose that's their prerogative. Our job is to make sure we recover for the Commonwealth. It's their job to decide how to appropriate the funds.
Thank you. Other question. We have enacted a legislative action site to help move legislators off the dime with respect to an amendment to the Hate Crimes Act.
Yeah.
You actually proposed that amendment in 2004.
10 years ago or so, yeah.
More than 10 years
okay.
ago. We've now working across the state with the Pennsylvania Bar Association, the Allegheny County Bar Association, other bar associations. Any suggestions on how we get that bill moving?
I think the more you can keep it out of politics, the more you can keep it away from Democrat and Republican, and just make it clear that, we went from being one of the states where we were in the lead, if you will, on this by passing, because it was originally passed and then struck down by the Supreme Court, if I recall, based on how it was attached to the underlying bill, not on the merits of it, of the particular hate crimes law. I think it's just important to do this in the most nonpartisan way possible, and I will continue to lend my voice in this process. We have beefed up our civil rights division in the AG's office to be able to deal with some of these cases. I think you're seeing maybe a different philosophical approach from the Department of Justice on it. So I think it's important that the states are leaders on this, and it would be great to have the added tools when it comes to hate crimes.
General, good afternoon. I'm a former career prosecutor and was the United States Attorney here for 5 or 6 years. I know you got sandbagged by the referral of the Amtrak prosecution by the district attorney here, who took a dive. They should have stood up and did what they should have done and competed it. I was kind of disappointed to see that your office took it on. I think that statute that is there is entirely unconstitutional. It violates the separation of powers, and it's an insult to really all the prosecutors and defense counsel. I think you had an opportunity there as the chief prosecutor to say, look, I'm not going to do this, take me on. Nothing could have happened, and the bill would have really gotten some air and a bit of decision. Anyway, why'd you take it on?
I was hoping you weren't going to have a question there. You were just making a statement. I was going to listen intently.
I know, you were sandbag. You got it. You only had 2 hours to do it, so I understand.
Yeah, it's fair. Let me just go over the timeline a little bit on this. And obviously, this is very much a pending matter, so I'm going to be careful about what I say, on this matter. The statute of limitations on this was 2 years. We received, with about a week or so to go, maybe 2 weeks or so to go, the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office decided they were not going to prosecute this case. They made that judgment, which is entirely within their right. There was then a private criminal complaint, as you referenced in your question, brought. And you referenced the underlying statute that allows it. I haven't seen something like that ever, and folks I've talked to have been around a lot longer than I said they haven't seen it 20, 30, 40 years of practice. At that moment when the judge determined that this private criminal action could go forward, the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office cited a conflict and sent it over to us. We literally had 24 hours to make a judgment, and we had this order effectively from a judge saying you have to do this. If someone doesn't like the underlying statute, I can opine on things, but that's not my job to make law. My job is to enforce the law. And so we were presented with a challenge here. Do we bring the case just based on the private criminal complaint that involved, I think it was 1 or 2 victims, or do we bring it on behalf of all of the victims? We made the judgment that if we're going to be forced by law to bring it on behalf of 1 or 2 of the victims, that all of the victims should have, their interests heard, and we should seek justice for all of them, not just those who were represented in the private criminal complaint. Obviously, we brought the charges. I thought our prosecutors did a good job the other day. This municipal court judge, I guess, viewed it otherwise, and now we're making a determination as to what steps we're going to take going forward. And you should expect an announcement from my office on that in a fairly short time.
General, I think that statute ought to be tossed out. You're in the right position to do it. So I'm just passing it on to you from one prosecutor to another.
Thank you.
Second question, if I may sneak it in. There is a task force appointed by the Supreme Court to oversee and redo the very badly needed overhaul of the grand jury statute, state grand jury statute. Some of the commentators, including me, have said one of the problems here is that there is no grand jury practice procedure. In the federal government, Department of Justice does it.
Right.
No Attorney General of Pennsylvania has ever done it.
Right.
Do you have any plans on taking a look at that?
I've been speaking with the chief as well as with his appointee to chair the task force, a judge from Allegheny County. Mariani. I'm hopeful that at the end of this process, there will be responsible reform that continues to allow us to have the tools of a statewide investigative grand jury, which we think are really critical. And I think what I have learned in both chairing reform efforts as a legislator, being involved in trying to change government for the better, as really a reformer, which I've been throughout my career, is that a lot of this requires good actors, right? You need a responsible attorney general and responsible senior leaders like Jonathan Goldman. And when you have that, combined with the kind of manuals and policies that need to be spelled out, then good things happen and abuse does not occur. When you don't have that, there are opportunities for abuse. So I think this task force is reacting to some of the abuse of the past, at least, well, I don't want to speak for the chief. The chief can speak for himself. And I think that is a reasonable thing to study further. My office will be involved in this process. I'm not going to be willing to give up any of the tools at our discretion to be able to keep the people of Pennsylvania safe. And we will hope that there'll be a good positive outcome that comes from it. I think there's some good lessons at the federal level where you obviously practiced for many years that we can learn from. And I think there's some good things happening at the state level that we can enhance.
I'm for the grand jury. I'm not saying to take it down. It needs to be tuned up, and you are the one who can do it. Because you are the chief law enforcement officer, and I think they'd look to you to make that manual. Thank you.
Did you just give me 2 assignments here? Is that what you said?
I wonder if you could talk a bit, following up on your earlier point about getting involved in nationwide actions by attorneys general, about those actions that you have elected not to get involved in, and how you deal with the budgetary constraints of entering the fray in a nationwide action that might interfere with the resources for direct actions here at home.
Sure. Our judgment on whether or not to get involved in these actions is actually pretty simple, and Jonathan's at the head of the table when we have these discussions as the leader of our civil division. We really just focus on the rule of law, and I stress to our team over and over again, take your policy views out of the discussion, take your political views out of the discussion, and I run a bipartisan office. I've got Republicans and Democrats sitting around the table, men, women, people of color, gay, straight. I mean, we have a very diverse coalition of people sitting around the table when we're discussing these things. And we are focused like a laser beam on one thing and one thing only, the rule of law. And so for us, the choice is made for us in many ways once we determine whether something's lawful or not. If the administration is doing something or some company is doing something that we think is unlawful, I feel a responsibility to get engaged. In terms of our resources, obviously you always have to be careful about expending too many resources on one thing at the expense of another. But we have an unbelievably dedicated team, a strong team, a growing team, and a team that is strengthened by being involved in these multi-state, efforts. So, for example, you have the state of Ohio right now suing various opioid manufacturers. Now, I would point out that those who have gone it alone and filed suit, they're not only expending a lot more resources internally within their offices because they're doing it alone, but they're also stuck in pre-discovery for years. I mean, they really are not getting very far in this. When you join with other states in one of these big multi-state investigations, you're able to share the load, you're able to learn from the other states, you're able to lean on others, and you're actually able to expend resources in a far more responsible way. I haven't cost the taxpayers any additional money because we've engaged in these, in these matters. If anything, I've been careful with our tax dollars by working with other states in order to strengthen our hand, if you will. So that's how we make our judgments. It's about the rule of law, and we have a skilled group of people that work with a skilled group of attorneys in the other AG's offices, and we're making good progress.
So I have 2 parts. One, you mentioned the Volkswagen settlement that brought in $35 million to the state. That was great. And that's
Actually, it was actually over $50 million, but that last piece was 35.
Right.
Okay.
So that's a great example of what an attorney general can do. And I know we've had a lot of class action lawsuits For instance, the cigarette lawsuit, that brought in a few $100 million to the Commonwealth years ago when Mike Fisher was Attorney General. So my question is, are there any other class actions that are pending now that looks like we'll be able to recover money? So what class actions are going on now? A, and two, at one time before 1980, the Attorney General was always appointed,
Right.
and now they're elected not only in Pennsylvania, but practically every state. New Jersey still appoints, the governor appoints the Attorney General, like they did here before 1980. How many Attorney Generals are elected and how many are appointed? I don't know if you know.
I think there's about a dozen or so that are appointed, and that's an unofficial number. Someone can Google it and tell me I'm wrong, but I think it's about a dozen or so that are appointed. As to the first thing, I think probably the biggest case that I can talk about that we're working on right now in that realm would be our investigation of the opioid manufacturing industry, which I think is really akin to tobacco, and it's a case that I am looking to not only recover for the Commonwealth, but to change corporate behavior and make sure that reforms are put in place by these pharmaceutical companies to help stop this epidemic we face right now and ensure that there's not another one in the future. This has been a massive undertaking, and I believe it will have tremendous results for the Commonwealth when all is said and done. And if I'm one of those opioid manufacturers that I named earlier today, I'd be concerned.
Thanks, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Cohen, and I work at the Legal Help Center, and I'm focused on tenant rights.
Okay.
We've talked earlier about the credit screening companies and how at least one is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But there are a number of tenant screening agencies that are way less reliable than the credit screening agencies.
Okay.
So when a judgment occurs or doesn't occur in a court, these tenant screening agencies are supposed to report it and report it accurately to potential landlords. And what we find is that routinely their information is wrong, and the consumer/tenants are not able to get decent housing. It's a barrier to decent housing. And I was wondering if you are either looking into it or be willing to look into these companies, because it's damaging the quality of life for many of our tenants in the cities and out of the cities.
I have heard a little bit about this. I'd love to work with you on it and learn more. Jonathan's probably the right guy to follow up with. We can certainly talk, but that is an area of interest to us and something I've heard from the public as I've traveled around. I would point out it's not just here in Philadelphia. I've gotten some complaints about that in Reading and Pittsburgh and in Erie as well.
Thank you.
Dan Packel, I'm a reporter with Law 360. You spoke at the beginning about environmental protection efforts. I don't recall any significant environmental crimes prosecution announcements since you've taken over. What has the office done to bolster its relationship with DEP in order to increase the number of potential referrals coming in the door?
Sure. We did make a fairly significant arrest in the Scranton area, which you may not have covered. It's probably outside of your readership area, potentially. I don't know. That was one that we had just a few months ago.
I remember that.
Do you? Okay. But clearly, the relationship with DEP was something that needed to be improved when I took office. And I would say this is not a reflection on Governor Wolf for me. This has historically been, a relationship that has not been as strong as it needs to be. I can report to you that with the addition of Chief Deputy Attorney General Steve Sanacero for dealing with environmental protection, along with a willingness by DEP to work more closely with us, that relationship has been strengthened. The pipeline has been open on referrals, and we have a number of active cases, which of course I'm not going to get into here. And I think the people of Pennsylvania are being well served by not only the aggressive stance we've taken in my office, but a willingness with DEP to work with us.
Good afternoon, Mr. Attorney General. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Tim Holman. Just heard you talking about the rule of law in your last answer, and it was very appropriate in that context, I thought. And it made me think, though, that lately there's almost this sort of sense, in particularly, I think, although not obviously one among people of color, that sometimes the expression "the rule of law" means people of color better watch out. And I'm wondering if you think that the Attorney General sort of has a role in improving sort of how the public perceives our judicial system and our process, and what, if anything, you think that you can do.
I think the rule of law can be equally powerful to protect the interests of a minority group as it can to protect others. And I think certainly the way we try to dispense justice in the Attorney General's office, it is to uplift all Pennsylvanians and protect the interests of all. I recognize that that is not uniform throughout our legal system, which is why my goal with any case, investigation, whatever the matter may be, is to make sure that at the end of the day, even a party that is not pleased with the decision we make feels like they got a fair shot, feels like they were heard, feels like the people sitting around the table reflected who they are and what they look like and where they're from and who they love and who they pray to. And it's an office where people can feel comfortable sharing their concerns or sharing their thoughts. As I said at the top of my remarks, I do view myself really as an ambassador for our justice system, in part to clean up the challenges that I inherited from my elected predecessor, but also because we're such a key part of the overall system and the overall process, and in many ways we're the part that people across Pennsylvania see, maybe more than the judiciary, and I mean that in no way, shape, or form is disrespect to them, but oftentimes people don't know their judge, or they don't see or participate in that process the way maybe you or I do. But they see us, and they see us out there, and we recognize that we must reflect the best of the best in the Commonwealth, and that we must do so in an ethical, thoughtful, responsible, fair way. And so we strive to do that with every case. I appreciate the tone and tenor of your question and where you're coming from. All I can do in my agency is lead it in a way that respects people of all faiths, all colors, all nationalities, etc. And it's something that we strive to do each and every day.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Gina Maisto-Smith, former prosecutor, and now I'm at Cozen O'Connor working in campus sexual assault.
Doing great work.
Great work. Thanks. I just first will tell you, according to Wikipedia, 7 states appoint their AG by the governor.
I said 7, right? PCN, did I say 7?
Close enough.
I believe I said 12.
And one state the legislature appoints. But
that's 8. That's close.
Right? Very close. What I wanted to ask is, what are the current efforts with respect to campus sexual assault? I've been following them closely, but I'd love this group to know the great work that you're doing and the leadership that you're providing nationally.
We kicked off an important initiative at Westchester University the other day to help deal with campus sexual assault, to both help administrators understand their responsibilities, help students understand where they can get help, help students understand the ways in which they can interact with law enforcement and the impact it could potentially have on them when they do that. Most importantly, to help victims get the care and services and help that they need. So that's one piece of what we're doing. And we've got a series of roundtable discussions and other things across Pennsylvania campuses this year, and we'll be coming out with some guidance for the universities and the students that really comes from the universities and the students. I think too oftentimes what I heard from universities is, something is dictated to them without fully understanding the challenges that they face on campus. But I've made it clear, we've got to help students get the help they need. We've got to make sure that they are safe on campus. When parents drop their kids off at college, as they did a few weeks ago, you should be a little sad, right? You should feel a little nostalgic. But you shouldn't be worried. You shouldn't be scared like so many parents are because of the extraordinarily high incidence of sexual assault. 23% of women on campus are going to be sexually assaulted. We shouldn't tolerate that as a society. So we're working hard here in Pennsylvania to deal with that. The other thing I'm doing is I've made it very clear to Secretary DeVos at the federal level that we'll take legal action to protect the Title IX protections that the Obama administration put in place. Now, they're not perfect and they could use reform, but doing away with them, as Secretary DeVos is trying to do, makes no sense and is something that I think ultimately makes people less safe on campus. This is something that we have to be willing to speak about openly, as you do every day. Do away with the stigma. Do away with the concern of students to come ask for help, and in particular do away with a university feeling like if they kind of put something under the rug or hide the real data or hide the real facts, that somehow they're a better institution because their statistics, paint a different story than what's really happening on campus. And I have a zero tolerance when it comes to administrators trying to hide information or sweep things under the rug. It's an important area. It's an important area for me as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of Pennsylvania. It's an important area for me as a father of four. And it's an important area for all of us here in Pennsylvania. Our universities, our colleges, are such an important part of who we are as a Commonwealth, an important part of our economy, an important part of our quality of life. We need to make sure that students are safe on campus.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Ron Micha. I'm with the law firm of Marshall Denny here in Philadelphia, and my practice focuses in consumer law. So over the past couple of years, we've been seeing a lot of regulation in this area, in the industries of debt collection and debt purchasing and consumer lending. We've also been seeing a lot of news on the use of auto dialers, calling individuals, and some large verdicts that have been making national news almost weekly now. Most of this regulation has come through the Federal Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So my question to you is, what are your office's views on the CFPB and how they've been operating on a federal level, and how is your office implementing their views on the state level here in Pennsylvania?
So I'm a believer in the CFPB. I think it was one of the important things that came out of the economic crash in 2008. Obviously, it can be tinkered with and it can always be improved upon, but I think it's a really important thing to have at the federal level. It's become clear through multiple statements and efforts that this administration and some in this Congress want to do away with it, and they're searching desperately for ways to do away with it. We're not standing idly by in Pennsylvania. I stated at the outset that dealing with scams, particularly financial scams, is a big part of what I think my mandate is as your Attorney General. So we created the Consumer Financial Protection Unit in the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. We're one of the few states that now has one. It's staffed by the person that was, I think, the fourth or fifth employee at CFPB, who's a Pittsburgher, so he heads this initiative up for us out in Pittsburgh. And we are already seeing the fruits of that labor. We're seeing good things come as a result of it. It's an important initiative, and I think you're going to see more and more states pick up on it as the federal government kind of walks away from what I think is its responsibility to protect people from these kind of financial scams and crimes. As it relates to, I want to make a point on the kind of the telecom scams. Those are coming over the auto dialers and other things, which I think you referenced in your question. We have petitioned a group of, I think, 32 or 33 AGs, bipartisan, petitioned the FCC to allow us the authority to get, the telecom companies, Verizon, AT&T, etc., to be able to stop the spoof calls. These spoofing calls are these fake, scam calls that look like they're coming from a number in your neighborhood. Right? I mean, you've all seen the 1-800 number, so you see it on your caller ID, you just don't answer it. But now it looks like it's coming from around the corner, and so you think it's legitimate. And in particular, seniors are really susceptible to these kinds of scams. So we're hoping that as the FCC goes through its process, I think they're supposed to come out with something in October, they'll give us those tools to be able to shut down those spoof calls, which I think will help us really make a dent in these kind of scams, particularly against our seniors.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Beth Shea from the Senior Law Center. And I wanted to just shine a bit of light on the Home Repair Contractor Consumer Protection Act that was passed in 2008 in our Commonwealth. We testified when that legislation was being crafted and saw the need to put in place funding for people that get ripped off by the home contractors who are then cannot be found. That was not put into the legislation in 2008, and we suffer from it today. So I wanted to know if there's any movement afoot to create some kind of protection, and I see it from the senior homeowners in our city who are suffering with it. If there's any funding available to rescue these people who have lost what for them is a great deal of money, right, trying to repair their houses. Right. And number two, the contractors aren't registering as right, required by that law. Right. And if they don't register, we don't figure out who their liability insurers are and how to begin the settlement discussions. and that's a big handicap.
I'm a big supporter of the HICPA law. I was in the legislature when it passed, and I think it's really important. I'll deal with your questions in reverse order. We had a few months ago, we identified a number of contractors. I think there's 30 or 40. I'll have to check. I'm sure someone will Google it while I'm saying it here and come up with the exact number of contractors that had failed to register. And so we are being much more aggressive in that area, which I think is having an effect on the behavior of contractors to make sure they register. Number one. Number two, when I testified in February before the House and Senate Appropriations Committee on my budget request, I specifically asked for additional funds to help us enforce the HICPA law. So I am asking them. They're still working through their budget right now. Hopefully that process will come to completion soon, and there'll be some additional resources available for HICPA. I'm a big supporter of that, and I appreciate you raising it.
Further questions?
Anybody else?
I want to thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
For coming to speak to us.
I just want to say this in closing. I appreciate all of you, and I appreciate the way in which you are using your collective voice in the civic arena today. It's something that I know is new for the Bar Association, and I am mindful of the fact that you have to be careful not to make it be viewed as partisan, but hopefully it can be viewed in a way that it is elevating our city and our region, and we really appreciate that. So thank you, and again, I want to stress, get to know Jonathan Goldman. He's the guy you really want to know, and I thank you for having me here today. Thank you.